So when we first obtained the dossier, I think like a number of other organizations that got copies of it, we saw it as a source of tips for reporting, and we're chasing various lines of reporting at reporters in Central Europe and Russia and elsewhere, just sort of looking into trying to confirm specific facts. We'd had conversations about, okay, at what point does a document like this itself become news, even if the allegations are unverified? But we certainly weren't, we were having those conversations. And I think what changed was that CNN reported that the dossier, which was already, as we knew, the subject of some kind of investigation, although we didn't know the details, had been briefed to two presidents, to the president-elect, to the president of the United States. And CNN, in fact, didn't just report that, but reported this dossier made allegations that the president of the United States had been compromised, and then didn't tell the audience what was going on. What are we talking about here? And so I think, in our view, that the document was already both being discussed and really influencing people's decisions at the highest levels of the highest levels of power in politics and government, also in the media, and in the intelligence community. And at this point, at the point when the top intelligence officials in the country decided to brief the president and the president-elect on it, it's clearly a matter of public interest, and so that's why we decided to publish it. And when we published it, we were very careful and very explicit that this was an unverified, that the claims in here were that we had not reported out these claims. There were certainly there was immediately a very heated debate among journalists, as there often is in these moments, about whether that was the right thing to do or not. I think a year later that is totally faded. I haven't heard anybody criticize the decision in months. And in fact, it's very hard to imagine following the reporting of the last year, following the Mueller investigation, following the infighting on Capitol Hill between Devin Nunes and Adam Schiff, without knowing what it was about. If journalists were saying, well, we have a secret document that would explain what is going on in America, but we're not going to tell you. I don't think anybody thinks at this point, thinks that was the right move. The President of the United States was also unhappy about it and called us a failing pile of garbage. Trump's an unusual figure because he's a media figure, more than most. All politicians are to some degree media characters in the media business, but Trump to a very literal extent. Really his most successful business venture ever is his role in The Apprentice, and is somebody who's always lived through the New York tabloids. And so there's a game that he has always, through his career, played with the media, of lying, of picking theatrical fights with the press, of giving access to favorite outlets, that I think, what you see now is that he's playing that game on this very grand scale, but for an audience that is not in on the joke. There's a level of sort of obvious cynicism to the way he approaches it, and to his, he has these deep relationships with television executives and newspaper reporters, and in fact is deeply familiar with how our businesses work, and with its strengths and with its weaknesses and with its PR vulnerabilities. I think most Americans do not have his level of, are not media insiders the way he is, and I think he's misleading millions and millions of people and his supporters just about the basic way reporting works. I think he's one of a number of factors that point in the same direction. It's this long-term erosion of kind of institutional authority of the media and all other institutions. Some of that, by the way, the fault of the media, in sort of treating what we do like it's we're some kind of high priesthood with special access to truth, and being opaque in what we do and getting huge stories wrong. I guess the Iraq War being the central one of the last 20 years. I think, and then just also the technical disruption of the media, and suddenly there are these new brands like BuzzFeed, and you have old ones that are collapsing, and you have trusted brands like Newsweek that are suddenly not what they used to be, and it's confusing. Even if you work in this business, it's confusing. And I think he's added to that this sort of clear narrative that the press is lying about Republicans and conservatives that is, that extends like a long line of kind of mostly cynical working of the refs by Republican political operatives. That also, by the way, again, sometimes it was fair criticism, but I think Trump has, turned the media into his central kind of foil. And I know it's not broadly working that well. He's incredibly unpopular. I mean, I do think that there's right now these new debates around speech that are totally new for at least recent U.S. history. I mean, I think certainly on campuses and the notions of, are certain kinds of speech not acceptable, but then I think also, when you hear the phrase information warfare thrown around, does that mean speech is a weapon? Should it be regulated? I think that's, and on particularly, social media platforms, those are also huge questions. I mean, I think the platforms, and they're all, each of them is different, and they're coming to this at different speeds, but are starting to realize that these are very difficult editorial calls they have to make, like the kinds of editorial calls journalists make, and that there's not a simple solution, that there's not a algorithmic signal that can tell you that this is true and that this is a lie, or that this is going to lead to a riot and a massacre and that this is a joke, and that there's not, and that while they keep talking about how AI is going to solve these problems, but ultimately with Alex Jones, for instance, who, had been lying for years about dead kids in school shootings, and nothing they banned him for was as bad as stuff he had said in the past, honestly, but that they just realized that at some point that the system wasn't going to fix itself, that they just had to make tough editorial calls and to try their best to explain them. I mean, they're trying to figure out a kind of framework for expressing clear rules around speech, but they're also dealing with the reality that trolls love clear rules, and if you make clear rules, people will find ways to tiptoe up into the edge, and that the traditional way you conduct platforms, you don't make rules, you're opaque, and you just delete what you feel like deleting. And I think they're trying to kind of balance those two approaches, but it's pretty, I mean, I think that basically these are really hard problems, and they're problems that lawyers and that, the American legal system has been weighing for a long, long time around defamation, around privacy, and it's stuff that journalists have also been weighing for a long time and trying to balance. And I think there was this idea in Silicon Valley that these were easy problems that they could just figure out and solve. And now that they've built these systems that are, totally out of their own control, much less anybody else's control, I think they're belatedly realizing that these are really hard questions and hard challenges, and that they don't, I think, really seem to have any solutions. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really complicated question, and right, there are questions both around regulating speech and around kind of antitrust regulation. Are these just monopolists with too much power who ought to be broken up in principle? And I think the dangerous thing for these social media platforms right now is that, we're in this incredibly polarized political moment, and if you're an institution in which one of the two poles has your back, they'll protect you and you're protected. But I think what you've seen for instance, in some of the Me Too cases and things like Harvey Weinstein, if both political poles, maybe for somewhat different reasons, turn on you, there's really there's no surviving that. And I think what you see for these social media platforms right now is that Democrats look at Twitter, look at Facebook, and see the people who delivered the election to Donald Trump in a lot of their views. Republicans look at them and see them as left-wing companies run out of California. And so they don't have a lot of friends. And I think their enemies may haven't quite agreed on what to do to them, but I think that's a very dangerous situation for them. I do think the other aspect of the Gawker case that I think is complicated is that it's a privacy case, not a defamation case, and I think that where the law is on privacy and where the sort of American journalist tradition is in privacy is very aggressive, and that there's a tradition, and I think with a lot of legal protection. I mean, I think Gawker lost that case for a number of reasons, but also partly because the jury fundamentally wasn't sympathetic to the way journalists see privacy. I think in an era when everybody has something embarrassing on their phone, jurors are much, much more sensitive to privacy claims, and I do think it's something that journalists need to calibrate a little and maybe think about, not just what are the limits of what's legally acceptable, but is it worth it for this story? What is the sort of, I think society is changing around privacy, and that we need to, calibrate around that.